ape man or anything, but they don't specify in the tablets, but to create a worker being. And they began to do this genetic modification, probably disconnecting some of our DNA, making genetic modification to us to get us to take orders from them. They inserted something called a worship gene, which was just discovered recently, that human beings have a gene inside of them that can be turned on and turned off. It can be turned off in a laboratory setting. It can also be turned off with a magnetic field around your head. And when it's off, you don't want to worship anything outside of yourself. You look inside, and when it's on, you look to get something from the outside. So this is incredible. They made us worship people.
Gene
yes.
inside of us to make us worship them. Right. How genius.
That's incredible, because then you're not a slave anymore. You're doing this for the honor of the gods.
And for people who think all this talk is really crazy, I want to put into perspective that we talked about this the other day, that during which war was it where the Soviet Union was experimenting? It was scientists in the Soviet Union, correct? They're experimenting with creating a chimpanzee human being hybrid that they would probably send to war.
Yeah.
So instead of having regular people, we would make this monster, this freak, ape man, and send him to war and have him crush the enemies.
Yeah.
So it's just how crazy is that? They knew how strong chimps are. I got an idea. Let's turn a chimp human, and that way if he dies, who gives a fuck?
Right.
We made him. Get him to go to work for us.
Yeah.
And now if you're a supremely enlightened being, wouldn't you think of human beings with all of our folly and all of our chaos and all of our war and bullshit and the internet and disinformation and misinformation, wouldn't you think of us kind of the same way we would think about that chimp hybrid thing? Yeah. If I was I was the president of Russia, I want my cousins to go to war?
No.
Or I want to send this freak that I made in a lab?
Yeah, and what's interesting, I'm glad you said made in a lab. They had talked briefly in that text about fashioning people. In other words, almost
How did they say it?
They said the word fashioning. Fashioning a being.
What was do you remember the actual quote?
I would have to look it up, the actual quote.
But they describe it as fashion.
Fashion, because they said even the lamb hadn't been fashioned yet, so they had fashioned lambs. So they fashioned, and it's also in the Epic of Gilgamesh, they fashioned the friend that Gilgamesh went on the journey with. He wasn't born from a woman's womb. They created him. They created him an artificial being to go on this journey in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So they used that phrase several times in the tablets. But they said, no, wait. It was almost like that's not a good idea, because in some ways it seems as if they had known that the idea of making these too many artificially created people wouldn't be a good idea. Now, they didn't go deeper than that, but you can see where we are today with AI and everything else, and these robots that are coming. Maybe they knew something about that, but they decided to take a biological being and genetically modify and program that to do the work, and that's exactly what they did.
Well, if they really knew what we would be capable of and that we would be illogical, overpopulation would be a gigantic issue. Mm-hmm. And in many parts, it's not really that big of an issue here except for in cities, but in many parts of the world, it's the whole country. Yeah. The whole country is New York City, which is just fucking bonkers. And you got it's actually not true. It's not even that bad, even in China. China has a lot of open space. But when you're in those cities, they are massive, and they are filled with people. Yeah. And that is probably what you'd imagine a higher being would do if it was like us, like kind of illogical and kind of a little bit reckless and has a little bit too much technology for the average person that didn't develop the technology. But all of a sudden you got some 85 IQ dope who has access to all the things that all these geniuses have created.
Yeah.
You could figure, we talked to Michio Kaku, he built a nuclear reactor in his house when he was a kid.
I heard about that. That was crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I know.
That's so crazy. But there's a lot of different stuff that you can do and have access to technology that is beyond anything you would ever be able to invent with your own mind. But because we share things across the board, you would imagine that if you were an enlightened being from another planet that's a million years more advanced than us, you'd go, I see where this one's going. You have that cousin who's an alcoholic and then he wins the lottery, like, oh shit, Derek just won the lottery. Yeah. This is going to be crazy. Derek's got $200 million. It's going to be fucking insane.
It's crazy. And they knew they were going outside their own guidelines and their own laws, their parameters, because they made a statement in the text. They said the creator of all is going to punish them, or they would have to answer to the creator of all for what they did here. So, and that lets you know they weren't really gods. They knew themselves that they weren't the creator of the universe, but that they masqueraded as gods. on this planet.
Just like we did when, when different versions of human civilization would find primitive tribes, like the cargo tribe,
cults.
The cargo cult that you talked about in your documentary. Yeah. That is so fascinating that during World War II, planes landed on these remote places, and these people built mock planes to show like what the thing was that came to visit them that they thought were like gods.
Wild.
Do you think that if the Anunnaki are real, and if Nibiru really exists, and there's another planet with highly intelligent beings that are far more advanced than us, if that's the case, do you think there's more advanced and more, just like we are to chimpanzees, they are to us, and then another race is to them, and then it just keeps going on and on forever until you're God?
Absolutely. I believe there's levels to the game, just like there's levels in terms of how we live on this planet.
Yeah.
We have the first world, second world, third world, just here on Earth. Now magnify that one as a fractal, as a universe as a whole. You have civilizations that are 1 million, 2 million, maybe even 1 billion years ahead, for every civilization progressing within the universe at a specific rate. So you can have beings that have already maybe even shed their corporeal bodies and only exist as beings of energetic light. And then you have everything all the way back down towards us. In the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, he actually says that he has achieved the ability to incarnate at will on and in the plane he desires. He claims to be able to incarnate whenever he wants and even into other dimensions, which is wild.
That's next level.
Yeah, that's next level.
But it does make sense that if we're capable of doing what we're doing, we were talking about your phone, the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra with zooms and all this different shit. That's magic to someone just 200 years ago. And if it keeps going and you keep like playing this out as far as possible, it kind of makes sense there would be levels to the kind of intelligent life that exists in the universe beyond our comprehension. Have you talked to Terrence Howard? Do you know his theory about how planets are created? That it's just things ejecting from the sun over billions and billions of years, and that there's a Goldilocks zone where you can create life.
Right.
And that's where the people are. Yeah. And then as this Goldilocks zone gets, you have to be super technologically proficient in order to control your environment to the extent that you no longer require the sun in order to keep you alive. That kind of makes sense if Nibiru is out there past Pluto.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense.
It makes sense that
Howard, because I just talked to him a couple hours ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, so we were talking about wave conjugations and everything.
Fucked me up for like 3 days. I left this podcast for 3 days. I was like, God damn. First of all, how the fuck is he so smart? Like, how would you ever imagine that a dude who's an actor on a television show or in a movie is that smart? Like freaky smart.
Right.
But his theory about the creation of planets, I was like, oh, that makes sense.